Folks, pull up a chair. I need to talk to you about something that's circulating right now. A story claiming that Pam Bondi, Trump's Attorney General, faces imminent arrest after a federal judge exposed her for destroying evidence and defying court orders. And I want to be absolutely clear with you from the start. I cannot verify this story, cannot find mainstream news coverage confirming these claims, cannot identify which judge, which case, which specific documents, cannot confirm any of the dramatic allegations being made. And that matters. That matters enormously. Because if this story is true, if the Attorney General of the United States is actually facing arrest for obstruction of justice, for destroying evidence, for defying court orders, that would be the biggest story in America right now. Would be covered by every major news outlet, would be discussed by every legal analyst, would be trending on every platform, would be impossible to miss. But I can't find that coverage, can't verify the claims, can't confirm the story. And that should immediately raise red flags for anyone who cares about truth, about accuracy, about not spreading misinformation even when it serves narratives we might want to believe. Now, I want to be clear about something else. I have no love for Pam Bondi. She's Trump's personal attorney, who he appointed Attorney General specifically because she's loyal to him rather than to the Constitution or to justice. She's someone who will protect Trump rather than prosecute his crimes. She's part of the corrupt system Trump has built to place himself above the law. I would love to see her face accountability for that corruption. Would celebrate if she actually faced prosecution for obstruction of justice. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. Hoping for accountability doesn't justify spreading unverified claims. Hating corruption doesn't excuse circulating stories we cannot confirm. Because when we do that, when we spread misinformation, even in service of what seem like good goals, we damage our own credibility. We give Trump ammunition. We make it easier for him to dismiss all criticism as fake news. We undermine the very accountability we're trying to advance. So let me walk through this story carefully. Let me show you what it claims, why those claims are concerning, why I cannot verify them, and what that should teach us about how to navigate an information environment that's deliberately polluted by both Trump's lies and by people who oppose Trump, sometimes spreading unverified claims. The story claims that a federal judge publicly called out Bondi for unlawful actions. Claims the judge highlighted a clear pattern of obstruction and blatant disregard for court orders. Claims the judge made clear that Bondi could be taken into custody at any time. Claims the judge detailed how Bondi actively destroyed evidence and ignored direct court orders. Claims she ordered sensitive DOJ documents removed and destroyed after the court specifically said to preserve them. Claims she guided staff to physically delete files and signed off on efforts to cover up evidence. Those are serious allegations. If true, they would constitute clear obstruction of justice, clear contempt of court, clear criminal conduct by the Attorney General, would absolutely justify arrest, would represent exactly the kind of accountability that should happen when powerful officials break the law. But I cannot verify any of it, cannot find which judge made these statements, cannot identify which case involves these allegations, cannot locate court transcripts or filings documenting these claims, cannot find mainstream news coverage of a sitting Attorney General facing imminent arrest for obstruction of justice. The story then includes what appears to be real footage of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse questioning Bondi during her confirmation hearing about $50,000 in cash the FBI allegedly delivered to Tom Homan. That exchange is real. I can verify that happened. Whitehouse did question Bondi. She did give evasive answers. That's documented. But the story uses that real footage to build credibility for unverified claims, uses actual confirmed events to make unconfirmed allegations seem more believable. That's a classic misinformation technique. Mix truth with fiction. Use verified facts to lend credibility to unverified claims. Make it harder for people to distinguish what's real from what's not. The story also references a real incident where someone was arrested for posting a $45,000 bounty on Pam Bondi on TikTok. That happened. That's real. That's documented. Someone did post threats, did get arrested. That's verifiable. Again, mixing real events with unverified claims. using actual news to build credibility for allegations that cannot be confirmed. That's sophisticated misinformation. That's more effective than pure fabrication because it's harder to debunk, harder for people to recognize as potentially false because it contains true elements. The story claims there are witnesses from DOJ who took orders from Bondi and can testify about her directing destruction of documents. Claims there's digital forensic evidence showing files were deleted after preservation orders. Claims there are emails and logs proving Bondi's involvement. Claims staff have testified about being pressured to delete records. Claims deleted files have been recovered proving what Bondi tried to hide. All of that would be compelling evidence if it exists. Would be exactly the kind of documentation needed to prosecute obstruction of justice. Would make the case against Bondi overwhelming. But I cannot verify any of it exists. Cannot find reports of these witnesses testifying. Cannot locate forensic analyses being presented in court. Cannot identify which case all this evidence supposedly relates to. The story claims a judge warned Bondi in open court that if she didn't comply immediately, she would face criminal contempt charges and arrest. Claims the judge gave her an ultimatum: comply now or be taken into custody. Claims this happened in public, in open court, where everyone could witness it. Claims Bondi was visibly shaken by the warning. If that happened, it would be news. Major news. Unprecedented news. A sitting attorney general being threatened with immediate arrest in open court, that would be covered by every news outlet in America, would be the lead story everywhere, would be impossible to miss. But I can't find any coverage of it, can't verify it happened, can't identify which court, which judge, which proceeding. The absence of verification is itself significant, is evidence that the story might not be true. Because if these dramatic events actually occurred, they would be documented, would be covered, would be verifiable. The fact that I cannot find any confirmation despite searching extensively suggests the claims are false or at minimum grossly exaggerated. Now, let me talk about why stories like this circulate, why people create them, why others share them, why they spread even when they cannot be verified. Because understanding the mechanics of misinformation is essential for resisting it. Stories like this serve psychological needs. They provide satisfaction. They tell us what we want to hear, that corrupt officials face accountability, that justice works, that powerful people can't escape consequences, that our anger at corruption is justified and will be vindicated. Those are appealing narratives. They make us feel better. They provide hope that the system still works. And in an environment where Trump and his allies actually do escape accountability constantly, where corruption seems rampant and unpunished, where powerful people bend and break laws without consequences, stories about accountability happening become even more appealing. They give us what reality denies. They provide emotional satisfaction that actual events don't deliver. So, people create these stories, sometimes deliberately, as propaganda or to generate engagement and revenue, sometimes through misunderstanding or exaggeration, taking small, true elements and blowing them into dramatic narratives, sometimes through wishful thinking that transforms hopes into claims about reality. And people share them because they want them to be true, because they align with worldviews and values, because they provide emotional satisfaction, because they make us feel part of a movement for justice, because sharing them signals our values and commitments. Because in information environments where distinguishing truth from fiction is difficult, people often default to sharing what aligns with their beliefs rather than verifying accuracy. The result is misinformation that spreads widely despite being unverifiable. That gets shared by well-meaning people who think they're advancing accountability. That pollutes information environments with false claims. That damages credibility of legitimate criticism. That gives Trump ammunition to dismiss all attacks as fake news. That's the cost. That's why this matters. That's why I'm spending 30 minutes explaining why I cannot verify this story rather than just celebrating the possibility that Bondi might face arrest. Because the damage from spreading misinformation is real, is significant, is harmful to the very goals the misinformation claims to advance. Let me talk about what we know for certain about Pam Bondi, about why she's problematic, about why concerns about her are legitimate even if this specific story about imminent arrest cannot be verified. Because there are real, documented, verified reasons to be concerned about Bondi as Attorney General. We don't need unverified stories to make the case that her appointment is dangerous. Pam Bondi was Trump's personal attorney. She defended him during his first impeachment trial. She's been consistently loyal to Trump rather than to law or Constitution or justice. That loyalty, that track record of defending Trump regardless of facts, is why Trump appointed her Attorney General. Not because she's the most qualified lawyer in America, not because she has distinguished record of upholding justice, but because she'll protect him. And she's already demonstrated that protection. She's fired prosecutors who investigated Trump. That's confirmed. That happened. That's real obstruction of justice, using the Attorney General position to shut down investigations into the president who appointed her. That's corruption. That's exactly what people feared when Bondi was appointed. She's refused to answer questions about investigations. She's given evasive testimony. She's prioritized loyalty to Trump over transparency and accountability. All of that is documented. All of that is real. All of that justifies concerns about her as Attorney General. So the legitimate concerns about Bondi are substantial. The documented problems are serious. The real corruption is significant. We don't need to invent additional problems. Don't need to spread unverified stories about imminent arrest. Don't need to pretend judges are publicly threatening to jail her when we cannot confirm that's happening. The verified reality is damning enough, and focusing on that verified reality, that documented corruption, is more effective than spreading unverified claims. Because verified claims cannot be dismissed as fake news, cannot be debunked, cannot be used by Trump to undermine all criticism. They're real, they're proven, they're irrefutable. That's the standard we need to maintain. That's the discipline required. That's what distinguishes legitimate criticism from conspiracy theory and misinformation. We stick to what we can verify. We acknowledge what we cannot confirm. We distinguish hope from fact. We maintain credibility by being honest about what we know versus what we want to believe. Now, let me address the economics and politics of this situation. Because even if this specific story about imminent arrest is unverifiable, the broader issues it raises about accountability and corruption are real and important. I've spent 80 years investing, 80 years betting on American institutions, 80 years trusting that rule of law would prevail, that corruption would face consequences, that no one would be above the law. That's not naive optimism. That's been reality for most of American history. Leaders who broke laws faced prosecution. Officials who obstructed justice got charged. The system worked imperfectly, but it worked. But Trump has systematically undermined that, has placed loyalists in positions to protect him, has fired prosecutors who investigated him, has pardoned allies who committed crimes, has appointed an attorney general who will shield him rather than hold him accountable, has built a system designed to place himself above the law. That's corruption. That's authoritarian behavior. That's exactly what emoluments clauses and ethics rules and separation of powers are supposed to prevent. And it's succeeding. Trump is getting away with it, is operating without effective accountability, is demonstrating that presidential power can be used to escape consequences. That has economic implications, real implications, because economic stability depends on institutional stability, on rule of law working, on corruption facing consequences, on markets trusting that contracts will be enforced and laws will apply equally. When those foundations erode, when corruption becomes rampant, when powerful people escape accountability, economic confidence declines. Not immediately, not in dramatic market crashes, but in subtle ways that compound over time, in slightly higher risk premiums, in marginally reduced long-term investment, in incrementally more capital flowing to countries with stronger rule of law, in the accumulated cost of reduced confidence in American institutions. That cost is real, is paid by everyone who depends on stable economy, is consequence of Trump's corruption and the failure to hold him accountable. And it will continue until accountability is restored, until rule of law applies to presidents and attorneys general, until corruption faces real consequences. But that accountability won't come from spreading unverified stories about imminent arrests, won't come from misinformation that serves our values but damages our credibility, won't come from hoping so hard for justice that we start believing false claims about it happening. It will come, if it comes, from legitimate investigations, from courts doing their jobs, from prosecutors willing to act despite political pressure, from citizens demanding accountability through voting and organizing, from sustained commitment to truth and rule of law that makes corruption too costly to continue. That's the work. That's what matters. That's what this moment requires. Not celebrating unverified claims, but building movements for accountability, based on verified evidence, based on documented facts, based on truth that cannot be dismissed because it's actually true. Let me talk about what people should do when they encounter stories like this. When claims circulate that align with their values but cannot be verified. When narratives provide emotional satisfaction but lack confirmation. When hopes about justice become confused with claims about reality. First, verify before sharing. That's basic. That's essential. That's what prevents misinformation from spreading. Take the time to check whether claims can be confirmed. Look for mainstream news coverage. Search for court documents. Try to identify specific names and details. If you cannot verify a story, don't share it as if it's confirmed. Second, be skeptical of dramatic claims. The more dramatic a claim, the more important verification becomes. A sitting attorney general facing imminent arrest in open court, that would be huge news. If you're not seeing it covered everywhere, that should make you skeptical. Should prompt verification rather than immediate belief and sharing. Third, recognize misinformation techniques. Be aware that sophisticated misinformation mixes truth with fiction, uses real events to build credibility for false claims, makes verification harder by including elements that are true. Learn to identify these techniques so you can resist them. Fourth, distinguish between what you want to be true and what actually is true. Be honest with yourself about motivated reasoning, about tendency to believe claims that align with your values, about desire for justice that can make you accept unverified claims about justice happening. Recognize those tendencies and correct for them. Fifth, focus on verified evidence. There's plenty of real, documented, confirmed corruption to criticize, plenty of actual problems to address, plenty of legitimate concerns to raise. You don't need to amplify unverified claims. The verified reality is damning enough. Sixth, be willing to correct. If you shared something that turns out to be unverifiable, say so. Acknowledge the error. Explain what you got wrong. That builds rather than destroys credibility. Shows you care about truth, not just about advancing narratives. Seventh, demand better sources. When people share stories like this, ask them where it comes from, whether they verified it, whether mainstream sources are covering it. Push back on misinformation even when it serves goals you support, because truth matters more than temporary satisfaction. Those practices, that discipline, that commitment to verification over emotion, that's what protects movements for accountability from being undermined by their own misinformation. That's what maintains credibility, that makes criticism effective. That's what allows truth to eventually prevail. Now, I want to address the broader context, the information environment we're operating in, the challenges of distinguishing truth from fiction, the systematic pollution of discourse by both Trump's lies and by reactions to Trump that sometimes include spreading unverified claims. Trump lies constantly, spreads misinformation deliberately, uses it as a political weapon, creates confusion about basic facts, undermines trust in all institutions, including media and courts, makes people unable to distinguish truth from fiction because he's deliberately polluted the information environment. That's real. That's documented. That's a massive problem, and responding to it requires maintaining even higher standards of truth than we might otherwise demand. Because when truth itself is under attack, when the president lies constantly, when misinformation is rampant, the only effective response is to be absolutely scrupulous about accuracy. We cannot fight Trump's lies with our own lies, cannot combat his misinformation with misinformation that serves our values, cannot respond to his pollution of discourse by adding our own pollution, because that doesn't defeat him. That vindicates him. That proves his claims that everyone lies and no one can be trusted and truth doesn't exist. The only effective response to Trump's assault on truth is to be even more committed to truth ourselves, to verify everything, to acknowledge what we don't know, to correct errors, to maintain standards that distinguish us from him, to prove through our own behavior that truth exists and matters and can be defended. That's hard. That's demanding. That requires discipline we might not naturally have. That means resisting temptations to share stories we want to believe. That means accepting that accountability might not be happening as quickly as we hope. That means living with uncertainty and frustration rather than accepting false certainty that makes us feel better. But it's necessary. It's what the moment requires. It's how truth survives assault. It's how democracy persists despite attacks. It's how accountability eventually comes even when delayed. Through commitment to truth that refuses to be compromised by either Trump's lies or by our own desire for satisfying narratives. That's the standard. That's what I'm trying to model. That's why I'm spending 30 minutes explaining why I cannot verify this story about Bondi facing imminent arrest rather than just celebrating the possibility. Because maintaining standards matters more than temporary satisfaction. Because truth matters more than winning news cycles. Because credibility matters more than viral stories. Let me conclude by addressing what we should actually focus on. What actually matters. What requires attention and energy and organizing. Because it's not unverified stories about imminent arrests. It's real, verified, documented corruption that continues unchecked. Trump has appointed Pam Bondi to protect him. That's real. She's fired prosecutors investigating him. That's confirmed. She's refusing to hold him accountable. That's happening. The Justice Department has been captured by Trump loyalists. That's the reality. That's what requires response. And the response is political, is organizing, is voting, is demanding accountability through legitimate channels, is supporting investigations that follow proper procedures, is building movements that can overcome Trump's corruption through democratic means, is sustained commitment to institutions and rule of law, even when they're failing to deliver justice as quickly as we want. That work is unglamorous, is slow, is frustrating, doesn't provide the immediate satisfaction of believing attorney generals are about to be arrested, doesn't give us the emotional payoff of thinking justice is right around the corner, requires patience and persistence and willingness to accept that change takes time. But it's real. It's what works. It's how corruption actually gets defeated, not through viral stories about imminent arrests that cannot be verified, but through organized political action based on verified facts, demanding accountability through legitimate means over sustained periods. That's the challenge. That's what this moment requires. That's what I'm asking people to focus on, not spreading unverified stories, but building real movements for real accountability based on real evidence, demanding real change through real democratic processes. That's harder. That's less satisfying. That takes longer. But it's what works. It's what protects democracy. It's what eventually delivers justice. It's what this moment demands from everyone who cares about truth and accountability and rule of law. So I cannot give you the satisfying story about Pam Bondi facing imminent arrest, cannot confirm judges are threatening to jail her, cannot verify witnesses are testifying about her destroying evidence, would love to, would celebrate if it were true, but cannot confirm it's happening. What I can tell you is Trump has corrupted the Justice Department, has appointed Bondi to protect him, has systematically undermined accountability, and that responding to that requires commitment to truth, requires verified evidence, requires sustained organizing, requires patience, requires discipline, requires refusing to spread misinformation even when it serves our values. That's the standard. That's what this moment requires. That's what I'm committed to maintaining. That's what I'm asking others to join me in defending. Truth, verification, standards, credibility, the foundations that make accountability possible, the disciplines that protect democracy, the commitments that allow justice to eventually prevail. That's what matters. Not unverified stories, but verified truth. Not viral claims, but documented evidence. Not immediate satisfaction, but sustained commitment. Not hoping for accountability, but building it through legitimate means based on facts that cannot be dismissed. That's the work. That's what I'm doing. That's what I hope you'll do too. Because that's how we win, how democracy survives, how truth prevails, how accountability comes, eventually, through discipline, through commitment, through refusing to compromise standards, even when it's difficult, even when it's frustrating, even when lies seem easier than truth. Truth is what we have, what distinguishes us, what makes us credible, what allows us to eventually prevail. And defending it requires saying clearly, I cannot verify this story about Bondi facing imminent arrest, and neither should you share it as if it's confirmed, because truth matters more than satisfaction, always, especially now, when everything depends on defending it.